wait for others to come on. All right. So welcome to today's SharePoint Shop Talk. I'm very happy that we have everybody joining us today, and looking forward to an interactive conversation about SharePoint. Okay. My name is Jamie Schreight, and I am the SharePoint Shop Talk Community Manager. You can always reach me by Twitter at SPShopTalk, on our website, SharePointShopTalk.com, and also the organizers' Twitter handles at Arcovis, New York City as well. We're also on Facebook, and we have updates coming up on there, all of our panelists' tweets and blogs as well. And then we're on LinkedIn, so you can find us by searching for the group, which is SharePoint Shop Talk and the New York Enterprise Search User Group as well. For those of you joining us for the first time, just letting you know about a quick functionality. You have a dashboard there. Usually it comes up on your right-hand side. There's a red arrow that enlarges it and makes it smaller. There's also the little hand raise there. You can raise your hand if you want to interrupt us and you have any questions throughout the call. And also there's a questions box, and you can submit any questions there, or you can raise your hand and ask your questions live over the phone as well. So we just ask if you're on the phone, by phone and not on GoToMeeting using the microphone, that you do not place your call on hold. If you need an audio pen, just raise your hand and I'll send you one. Your phone can mute and unmute by pressing *6, and then you can always unmute yourself on the dashboard. Always remember to please state your name and your question, and always feel free to ask any question. No question is too big or too small. So without further ado, we are going to introduce our panelists, and we're going to start with Laura.
Hello, I'm Laura Rogers. I'm SharePoint MVP, live in Birmingham, Alabama. Here's a link to my blog here and on Twitter, and there are the names of the books, most recent books I've written. And I specialize in no-code solutions like SharePoint Designer workflows, database web parts, and I love InfoPath. That's about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Uh-oh, I think something happened to my screen. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. Next up, we have Natalia. Natalia's here as well. Natalia, please introduce yourself to the crowd.
Hi, team. My name is Natalia Voskresenska. I'm a SharePoint MVP, and I work as a SharePoint architect and enterprise search engineer at Arcovis. And I'm also a Microsoft VTSP, and I've been working with SharePoint since 2003 version of the product.
Thanks for joining us. And we also have Paul Olenek with us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Olenek. I'm a senior SharePoint architect with Arcovis here in New York City. I'm also a Microsoft SharePoint VTSP, and I'm highly focused on enterprise search these days, and I'm also a fairly frequent speaker and blogger and writer on the subjects of SharePoint and search.
Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thank you.
And and the always patient John White. Oh,
I don't think I've ever been accused of that before. It's yeah. My name's John White. I'm also a SharePoint MVP. In addition to that, I'm a SQL Server VTS with Microsoft Canada. As you've probably figured out, I'm up here in the Great White North, just outside of Toronto, Ontario. Work for a company called Unlimited Viz, and we specialize primarily in SharePoint with business intelligence solutions.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. So I just wanted to let you know the organizers are Arcovis, and they are SharePoint expert search specialists, and specializing in SharePoint and search. And they have box offerings which are Fast in a Box, SharePoint for Internet Deployment, and Search First Migration. You can always contact Arcovis at info@arcovis.com, as well as on Twitter at Arcovis New York City. Remember, they're Microsoft Go Certified Partners and also virtual technology solution professionals. So if you have any questions, you can always direct to them. Just letting you know a couple of things before we begin. Paul Lennox talk, 5 simple things things you can do to make a big impact on SharePoint search interest on our COVID New York channel, on YouTube channel. I wanted to let everyone know about Code Academy. If you haven't heard of that, that's a great source. I just found out about it yesterday at the Azure user group, and it's a great source to learn about code, and it's very interactive, and the best part, it's free. We're also having our two-part series coming up with K2 coming back to join with AtLib presentation, and also if you have any questions about troubleshooting fast search in the SharePoint crawler, you can also find Christopher Lorenge's talk on our COVID New York YouTube channel as well. These links and everything will be provided after the talk. So without further ado, what we're here to talk about today, two things actually, which is monitoring SharePoint 2010 as well as PerformancePoint. Oh, did I say that right? Yes, PerformancePoint. So let's start out with monitoring SharePoint 2010. The one thing that I wanted to just let everyone know is we have some pictures in here that were all from real-world SharePoint 2010. This is a great source. It has 22 MVPs, like some of our panelists, and they basically talk about all about SharePoint 2010 and what's new, and it addresses all the questions. So let's start with monitoring SharePoint 2010. I was wondering if the panel could help me out by kind of just giving an overview of unified logging services and those three different points and how they're used. Anyone?
Well, I'll jump in a little bit. I do a little bit of architecture, I guess. The ULS logging service is in, I hesitate to call it the 14 hive, but the program files, common files, et cetera, down to 14 and logs. And basically SharePoint's continuously logging any of its operations that it deems important, essentially, into that log. It's a text file, and it gets recycled when it gets full. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head when that is exactly. In 2010, supposedly at least, anything that's ever going to be logged out to the Windows event log by SharePoint will also be logged into the ULS. So the ULS should be considered your clearinghouse. It's a big old text file. If you ever get one of those error messages that pops up and you get a correlation ID, that's what it's referring to. So you can search that. It's a GUID, and you can take that correlation ID and search that against what's in the ULS file. There's a great tool out there, the ULS viewer, that you can run and give you real-time updates of what's going out to the ULS file, so you don't have to use like Notepad to search through it. So I like to use it. As well, yeah, the SharePoint logging database you got mentioned there. As far as I know, everything's supposed to go to the SharePoint logging database. It's an open, as opposed to all the rest of the SharePoint databases. You are allowed to go in and poke around and prod around in there. I've played with it from a reporting services standpoint a little bit, but not much. So I think it's probably an unexploited area from a monitoring standpoint. But I've never seen anybody really using it. Not yet. Not myself anyway. That's what I have to say. But anyway.
John, this is Paul. I just had a quick question. I also like using the ULS viewer, but I found that the last time I used it, I wasn't able to actually search for and get hits for any correlation IDs. Have you found that, or have you seen that work?
It's fun. I've never tried doing that. When I'm searching for a correlation ID, I typically stick to Notepad. I don't worry about firing that thing up. I use it primarily to like try stuff out, or if I'm getting consistent errors, I just have that running and I set it to show me only the errors. Do what I'm doing on the client side and look at what's popping up. So I'm using that for real-time monitoring as opposed to searching. But so no, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, I used to rely very heavily on it, but these days, because you have the correlation ID, about 90% of the time I'm looking at a log, I'm chasing down a correlation ID, and so if that doesn't work, then it feels awful.
One thing, yeah, exactly. I think wouldn't it be really nice if you could just click on the correlation ID and it could bring up all the entries from the ULS log through the UI, so you wouldn't have to actually open up the server and go to the file, et cetera, et cetera.
I almost wish you'd even say that because I had never thought of it. That would be awesome.
I wonder how hard that would be. That just occurred to me, but. wonder how hard that would be to extend out the standard error form. Because really, at the end of the day, all you'd have to do is serve out those logs through the web stack somehow.
That is a really good idea.
It'd be nice. Because obviously, to the end user, the correlation ID means 0 because they can't touch the server.
Right. Yeah, I actually created, there's a guy on last week's Shop Talk that was asking about how you can give a sort of friendlier error than the one that comes up in his data view web part and stuff like that. And I couldn't get myself off mute to talk about it, but I've created something just last week or something to give a friendlier message when users were seeing some errors in a search center. And so I wrote something sort of client-side, but I bet you it wouldn't take too much logic just to add a link there that's security trimmed for the admins that they could click on, I mean, we know where the logs are, so you wouldn't even need that much logic if you didn't want it to be sort of shrink wrappable,
Exactly. And if the log database has it, you can actually go from there instead of the file system. So that's interesting. It is. The correlation ID is a massive improvement over what used to be there in 2007, which was unknown error.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thanks, guys. I think you might have answered this question already, but I don't know if you can see Daniel's question where he says, is there a quick way to target a correlation ID without having to go and reset the filter each time?
The filter?
Daniel, let me unmute you. You're a friendly fellow. Hold on 1 second. I'm trying something new today. I'm actually using 2 computers, and actually, it's not really helping. All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Daniel.
Yeah, it's really when you select on the filter, you type in the correlation ID, you select from the combo box, and you cut and paste your correlation ID. And I find that really tiring. After I've done about 10 of these in a day, I'm falling asleep.
When you talk about the filter, you must be using like the ULS viewer or something like that, right?
Yeah, the ULS viewer. That's right.
I haven't used it for that, so I don't know if Paul's got any more experience, but I just use Notepad for that sort of thing, which is really annoying.
Yeah, I can't handle lots of white text or text. It just does my brain in.
So maybe you're answering the question that I was asking before. Are you able to search and get hits for a specific correlation ID with your?
Yes, certainly. You just open up the filter panel for option, and you just select the correlation ID, then you cut and paste the correlation ID from the page into that area. Press OK, there's a couple of seconds delay, and there it appears.
I think I was just trying to use the search box. That wasn't working.
No, I used actual filter in my case.
Okay. I expect that would be a massive improvement over what I use anyway. So I'm just wondering as well, Paul. One thing I often run into if you're not careful when you copy that correlation ID from the browser, it always throws that extra space in at the end. And,
yeah, I've seen that.
And I never get hits. I never get any results until you obviously trim that out. So just something to watch out for.
Yep. Good point.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to the question though. It's now that I know that it will work properly for correlation IDs, I'm going to explore it.
I wish I had there's a screenshot about the filter. I believe in the book that I had mentioned earlier. I wish I had put that up there. That probably would have been a little bit more significant.
Yeah.
There's another question that came in, and this one is from Susan. And he says, can we hook up the ULS to the dashboard or bring the data in SSAS or Power Pivot?
I haven't done it yet. You're making me want to do that. But if it's being logged out into the database, that should be good.
Daniel, I'm going to mute you again. I think that might be your background. Sorry.
Okay.
But yeah, if it's sitting there in that I've been meaning to go and explore that log database for years, and I just haven't done it yet. But you said the magic words with Power Pivot, and that might be a really easy way to do it. I'm going to look into that.
All right. So that was the questions that we had so far, and thank you all. That's exactly how we want to do this. As you hear the panelists talking, you can go ahead and ask your questions, and we'll get to them. All right. So the other thing was the developer dashboard. That also came up. And the one thing I found interesting is that they were saying that the developer dashboard is not for only for the developer, that the administrator can also use it as well. Are any of you actively using the developer dashboard? And if so, what are you using it for?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so I've used it for troubleshooting a lot. You know, I think the biggest thing that has come up for me is get a client saying, this page is loading really slow. And I think in 2007, what I would, you know, sort of the process that I would go through would be to look for really obvious stuff first. So go and look at the page in edit mode. Do they have 35 web parts on the page, something like that? Do they have a custom web part on there? Is it, you know, calling SQL and bringing back a zillion records, something like that? And then if I can't really see anything sort of just with the naked eye, then I would open something like Fiddler, which is a tool that monitors traffic from your browser, and it could look at what calls and things are happening on the page and how long things are taking to load and stuff like that. So now we have something that's built in to SharePoint, and so those are the times that I've looked at it. It gives you a whole bunch of really great information, and I just use it instead of having to use something like Fiddler.
Right. I also use it for performance troubleshooting. And the cool part is that besides just letting you know how long everything is loading on the web page, it also can let you know, like, for example, you know, how long it takes for an user to authenticate, etc. It's pretty helpful.
Wow. Thanks a lot. You know, I was looking at that, and he used one line just to say, you know what, this is like, it's something that everyone should be using if you're in charge of, I guess, monitoring your site. So
it's kind of nice too when you you configure it, or you expose it, I should say, using PowerShell, and depending on how you do it, you can have it always present for people with certain rights, right? So administrators would always see it on every page, while regular users wouldn't see it at all. So it's a nice thing that you can just spin up and always have there.
Right, you can kind of push that up. I guess develop a dashboard, push it up and push it down. Is that what you mean?
I guess that you
if you have the right.
And it's security trimmed, I guess, in a way, right? So only your administrator, you can decide who's going to see it.
Okay.
And then just leave it there, so you don't have to kind of like, there's not any intermediate step for them to start troubleshooting immediately.
Cool. Excellent. All right, what's next? So I guess you kind of talked about this already, John, which is the methods that you can use to view the trace logs, which is, I guess, Notepad and Excel, and then the MSDN ULS viewer. I guess that's what you guys were talking about just a second ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I had that here, but yeah, this is basically how it looks, and I guess it's a lot easier to find those correlation IDs using this format.
Well, the other thing it lets you do is, again, the way I typically use it is it lets you filter out what you're seeing in real time. So I could basically say, I only want to see high priority, or I only want to see errors, and that's what you're going to see come across your dashboard. So you can filter out effectively the noise in real time. So that's, again, I use it more as a real-time tool than as a searching tool.
I'm sending over this to everybody. Please let me know if you can see it. Anyone that's out there in the crowd. Kim Frey, she helped us with a link, I guess, on using PowerShell to find correlation IDs. So I'm sending that to everyone. Okay. Let me see here. Thanks a lot, Kim, by the way. Appreciate it. And thanks, Daniel, for letting me know you can see it. All right, so next up, what do we have? So I guess these are the last of the other things that takes place when you're monitoring SharePoint 2010. I don't know if anyone has any questions about, login. Well, there's a login database, and I think, John, you touched on it, because before any database, I guess, Microsoft doesn't want you to touch a database, but the login database, I guess you can touch it. You can and search it and things like that.
Yeah, most of the SharePoint databases, they say don't even look, which is a little impractical.
Don't look. Okay.
But the logging database is documented. There's a series of views in there that support lookups. Then again, I don't want to pass myself off as an expert on it. I've only glanced at it from a very high level so far. So.
All right, and then just a quick overview of the Health Analyzer and the Timer job. So what are they in place for?
So the Health Analyzer is like a set of rules that SharePoint, it's a sort of a list of things that SharePoint wants to check for and a set of rules. So to give one example is it'll check for disk space. So it'll say, does SharePoint have enough disk space to handle a full like RAM dump or something like that, and there's a formula involved with that. And when that timer job runs and it looks to see if your farm passes that rule, if it does not, you'll get a little warning in your what do you call it, the Health Analyzer dashboard. I think I'm making up the dashboard part, but that's basically how it works, and there's several rules that run, and you can configure them because there are some things that maybe will be known issues in your environment or things that don't apply to you, and you can shut them off. You can run them on purpose, or I should say you can run them declaratively, like whenever you want, stuff like that. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that.
There was another question from Daniel, and he said, good tips for logging the ULS from custom code. Are there any good samples out there?
I'm not aware of any off the top of my head.
Well, I think you can refer to the book that I mentioned earlier, Daniel. There were some samples in there. It's funny, this conversation is so organic, but a lot of the things that I was like, oh, maybe we won't talk about that too much. That's what we're talking about. So, so next, I'll send those over to you, Daniel. He gave some great PowerShell. Is that what you're referring to? He's referring to PowerShell coding? No. Okay. All right. So thanks a lot. This was a great overview about monitoring SharePoint 2010. And I don't know if there's any last best practices that the panel would like to offer to the group. Oh, web parts. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. Daniel was referring to web parts or Visual Studio 2010. All right. You guys probably already knew that. So any other questions from the group before we move on to PerformancePoint? Great. So once again, we're going to talk a little bit about PerformancePoint, and I feel bad because John was, I went to him for the overview for monitoring SharePoint 2010, but I wanted him to give me an overview for PerformancePoint services as well. So would you mind?
Yeah, I guess I'm hogging the microphone here.
That's what you're there for.
Actually, I just gave a talk to the local user group on SQL, what's new in SQL 2012 last night, and this topic exactly came up a fair bit. PerformancePoint, I like to say, it's kind of the red-headed stepchild of the business intelligence stack for Microsoft. Most of the BI tools are contained within SQL Server, and they're surfaced in SharePoint. PerformancePoint is actually a SharePoint product. It's a SharePoint shared service. It lives over here, and there's some capabilities that are in it that you can't get anywhere else. But in and of itself, it's primarily a mechanism to surface other back-end systems or other back-end BI tools. If you go back to PerformancePoint 2007 in its original incarnation, if anybody had the pleasure of working with it, I'm actually certified in it. It was kind of an amalgamation of a number of different products, one of which was called Planning, which was designed around doing budgeting processes. That's the piece that got thrown away. So if ever anybody comes up to you and says, I thought PerformancePoint went away. No, but the budgeting piece didn't live. So the planning didn't go away, but monitoring stayed. And monitoring was basically dashboarding. With 2007, PerformancePoint was the only way you could get a filter to drive multiple web parts, essentially. So I could have a filter on a particular value, and that filter value could drive this report and that report, etc. That was all assembled using the PerformancePoint dashboard designer. The dashboard designer still lives in 2010, but you don't need it now. The filters in SharePoint can be used to drive multiple web parts as well, and that is how they're implemented. So you can choose to use the dashboard designer to roll out your dashboards, or you could just use web parts and pages within SharePoint. So you're not restricted to using only PerformancePoint anymore. One of the things that PerformancePoint brings to the table you can't find anywhere else is scorecarding. And scorecarding is basically a way to roll up multiple KPIs on a single dashboard. So you basically got a management dashboard with a bunch of green or red lights, and you can drill through those green or red lights and see the sub-level green and red lights, which are KPIs, telling us how we're doing in our organization at a particular time. The other thing that PerformancePoint brings to the table that you don't have anywhere else is the concept of the analytic chart and the analytic grid. And the analytic chart and analytic grid, they basically are visualizations of cubes or multidimensional analysis. So if I have let's say I'm looking at a multidimensional chart, it's a bar chart. I want to, and it's sales by year. I want to drill into this particular year, and I want to see how that breaks down by area. Or I want to take this same data, and instead of looking at it by year, I want to look at it by geography. That's when we talk about pivoting. That's what we're talking about. So we could basically just pivot on that value. We can do that with a right click on an analytic chart or an analytic grid that way. So that's basically, but again, it needs a cube at the back end to drive it, and that cube has to have been designed. Actually, I want to backtrack on that. You don't need a cube anymore. If you're using SQL Server 2012 and you install analysis services or have an instance of analysis service running in the tabular mode, which is the new, it's called XVelocity or Vertipack, or basically the Power Pivot engine. You can use Power Pivot to essentially design your they're not called cubes anymore in that case, they're called multidimensional models. You can use Power Pivot to design that and use Visual Studio to take that model and deploy that to analysis services and use that. So you no longer basically have to have a tall pointy hat and flowing robes to be able to design multidimensional capabilities into your system. You can be a mere mortal who knows how to use Excel and build out these pretty fancy cubes. So PerformancePoint is one way of surfacing that information in a highly interactive way. I would not use the reports you get in PerformancePoint to do any printing. That's still definitely the realm of reporting services. It also still does have that dashboard designer I was talking about, and you can use that to put together your dashboards as a cohesive unit. It's a nice little one-click type of install, sort of like Report Builder. That's pretty much all I have to say about it, I think.
Thanks so much for that overview. I mean, that was excellent. We did have a couple of questions coming in. The first was, and Hassan, I know that you asked a question about ULS logs. I'll get back to that, but let me go to your PerformancePoint question. And he says, can we hook up any data source to the PerformancePoint if connecting user has access to the source?
Any data source. It's got its own data source definition. So, but what can you connect to? Off the top of my head, I don't remember. You can certainly connect to analysis services in SQL. There are others. I just don't know them off the top of my head. To use an analytic chart or an analytic grid, it has to be analysis services. I can tell you that.
All right. And the other question is, do people use PerformancePoint against SharePoint list? I would think this is limited as you're not using cubes.
Not at all, actually. Is that true? You might, no, you can query list. I'm wrong about that, but you're right. So a dashboard might have different types of reports. You don't have to use analytic charts or analytic grids. You can jam a reporting services report together with an Excel services report together with a straight, basically flat Excel style report with in PerformancePoint. And
this is Laura. I have a quick question for SharePoint stuff. Like just like a SharePoint flat table, there are only like one or two things you can do. Like one of them is just a scorecard or something like that. You can't.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
I'm kind of fuzzy on that, but I remember like being all excited thinking I was going to be able to do SharePoint reporting with PerformancePoint, but no.
You can do it with reporting service. So you could do that.
Yeah,
with
I love
services.
SSRS.
Yeah.
I do all that with SSRS, but PerformancePoint was very dismally disappointing that you couldn't. You have to have dimensional, a cube or whatever you call the new thing is called. You have to have that to do the charts and reports. Yeah.
Disappointing is a word I often hear when referred to that.
Oh man.
I prefer SSRS just personally. I think it's awesome, but yeah.
It is. It is. One thing I do caution against, if you got any amount of data in your SharePoint list, I wouldn't report on it natively. I'd move it into SQL to do that. Personally.
Define amount of data.
Large, like thousands of rows that you want to report on in real time.
And then you get it into SQL by doing some sort of custom, you'd have to develop something custom that would move that, copy it into SQL every night or something?
Developing's a dirty word, right? No,
well,
I use
it's not out of the box.
I use SSIS. It's still no code, but yeah, it's another tool. So you'd have a process. Basically, I like to report out of data warehouses typically. So we'd move.
Makes sense. I just didn't think that moving it from SharePoint was an easy thing, or syncing it or whatever.
There's a code view action that you basically need to install into your SSIS, which is the ETL tool. I'm using all kinds of acronyms. The tool that's used to take the data from the source and put it in the data warehouse. Well, you can do it. SharePoint list can be a source now as well. It can be a destination as well, but it can be a data source with SSIS. So that's how you do it. Yeah, I got a bunch of stuff on my blog about it if you're interested.
Oh, cool.
I'm sending across to the group. Hussein is giving us some info on them, just so you can see it there. Okay. Let's see. What do we have next? So you already mentioned about the scorecard. So let's move on. This is the part that I was so confused about. Creating a dashboard versus deploying a dashboard. So you create the dashboard utilizing web parts, and then you deploy it, and that's creating the reports?
Deploying it basically takes it from the client tool that you're designing in, and putting it into SharePoint where people can see it.
Oh.
That's the best way to put it.
Thanks. All right. And so, and just to mention anything about securing the dashboard, I believe that is important as well in terms of following up on all of the dashboards that you created.
Yeah, there's a whole security model in there in terms of who can use what. But at the end of the day, when you deploy these things, they're SharePoint pages with web parts on them, so they, kind of respect the same security model that any other content in SharePoint does.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Any other questions about PerformancePoint before we move on? I want to go back to, yes? Someone have a question? Okay. I want to go back to Hussein's other question. He said, is there a web part to view ULS logs? I guess not. All right. So we are going to open up the floor for live questions. now that we've covered those two topics. And Daniel, I'm going to unmute you. And I'm talking to Daniel Cho. I believe you had a question. Are you there, Daniel? Okay. Maybe not. All right. Are there any questions, general questions coming in? All right. Daniel has a question. I'm going to unmute Daniel. Yes, Daniel?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
I'm building a visual web part to produce a report of a list. I'm doing some processing on the field items. And I want to be able to style that. I want to leverage our sort of CSS that we built. And since if you use the toolbox and you drag the table from the toolbox onto your visual web part panel, it seems to be static. And most people seem to be going for grid view or list view. Is there a way of creating that table that's dynamic in the using the table in the for visual web parts?
I don't know of a way to bind data to an HTML table so that it would give you the right number of rows.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean that's sort of the job of those other controls that you mentioned would be like the list view and grid view and stuff like that. Is there a reason you want to use a table specifically?
It's not really. I just wanted to make it because we've got a certain style that we developed, and I want to be able to make the tables adhere to those styles. Mm-hmm. So, a table I could just shove a CSS, and that would determine the rows and the cells and how they look.
Right. I mean, you should be able to do the same with your grid view, and just you can define those styles in your code. So there are properties for those things.
So could I leverage an external style sheet rather than having to duplicate styles?
You want to make, you said you want to make an external style sheet?
Well, I want to refer to external style sheet rather than, the inline styles that you could do.
Right, but I guess you're saying that you already have some classes or
yeah, that's correct.
Defined.
That's correct.
CSS will alter. So I'm saying that you could assign those at design time with your grid view.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I get you.
And that way you wouldn't, that way you wouldn't have to deal with kind of outputting a bunch of HTML to do that for you with your table.
Okay.
I'm not like a hardcore .NET developer, but I would think that's the way to approach that. Please, somebody chime in and disagree though if you think I'm wrong.
Okay. Thanks so much, Paul and Daniel.
Thanks. Thank you.
Question. I see that Daniel Cho, he raised his hand again, so I'm hoping that we can get his question this time. Daniel? Hello? Oh, man. Maybe he's having some issues with his microphone. All right. I sent him a private chat message. Hopefully he'll reply to me and be ready for his question. Any other questions live over the phone before we move on? All right. So up next, let me see here. Oh wait, Kim has a question. Okay, so Kim has a question. She's asking, I have a question about information management policies. Has anyone successfully deployed an information management policy that started a workflow and allowed the workflow to declare a record? If so, any special things to know? And Kim, I'm going to unmute you just in case the panel needs more information from you.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the workflow, actually, if we run it manually, it works perfectly, but whenever we have the information management policies start the workflow, then it stops when it's ready to a record. Just stop.
Hey, Kim, this is Laura. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I've never done that. I've looked at it and I've seen the setting in there, but I've never actually tried it. So that's and it only does with your information management policy. It only does it with that one type of action. It doesn't like break for doing other things in the policy.
No, we can delete the. We have 5 options, and they can declare it a record or extend it or delete it. And it deletes, it extends, it sends an email. It does everything it's supposed to do, except when it comes to declaring a record, and then it just stops. And there's no errors, there's no correlation ID, there's nothing. And like I said, if I run it manually and declare it a record, it declares it a record and completes.
Oh.
But it's when it's information management policy.
I'm wondering if when you kick it off manually, if it's running under a different account.
If
you're running under a different account, a different context than when it gets kicked off by the other process.
Yeah, it says it runs under like if I do it, it says mine, and then it says system account.
Mm-hmm.
And all it gives me an error as a burden. I actually tried impersonating. It's still giving me impersonate as my. So that was my thought too. Maybe I need to impersonate it. No.
Yeah, that's what I would think too, Kim. But I haven't tried it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask: does the workflow start and stop, or does it just never start?
It starts. It does everything it's supposed to do up until I say, now declare a record. And I've tried pausing it for a minute. I've tried, it goes into pause. Never can pause. Like, pause a minute and declare a record. It just hangs up and stays in progress forever. But all the other actions, it is fine. It completes as expected.
I'm going to unmute Hassan. He has been giving some suggestions, so maybe he can help out a little bit.
Okay.
Hassan, are you there? Hello? Well, maybe I'll just read his questions if he can't speak. It says, is it a user ID issue that workflow is being run by system ID, and can you check the workflow service and see which, oh, he's not on the phone, which ID is being used?
I tried that, and that's why I tried the impersonation step, and it won't let me impersonate and declare a record. Like, it still won't do it if I impersonate.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Kim. I don't know if there's any. Well, he says check the services on WFE.
Services on WSE?
Mm-hmm.
And what am I checking for?
This is all coming in from him via text. He's. Do you know what he's checking for, Hassan? What he would check for? I don't know. Okay. If he gives any more feedback, I'll let you know. I'm not certain what he's referring to.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Kim. Any other questions? Okay. So, and interrupt us at any time if you tend to have a live question over the phone. So we've kind of perused the MSDN questions. Now, I don't know how many of you are using MSDN or post your questions there, but there are many questions that get submitted that do not get answered. And So there's one here that we have on the screen. But before we go there, Husan said that you should check the account that's being started with on WFE. Kim.
Okay, thanks. I'll check that.
All right. All right. So the first question that we have on from MSDN it says, I've created an external content type from a BDC data source in the log file, and they're getting this error there. And I think I should understand. He understands what it's telling him, but he has no idea what to do about it. Are there additional methods I should add to my BDC class, and what are they, and how do I reference them? And it's okay, because these questions, like, they were submitted and 4,000 views, and some of them were not answered. So let me know if we should pass.
Well, this one's actually kind of it's relatively easy. When you define an external content type, and that's going to be probably using SharePoint Designer, I'm going to guess here. One of the options you have is to limit the amount of items that are returned in any one call. And I typically don't do that from a demo standpoint because I don't have enough data in there to warrant it, but the danger there is you've got a SQL database with thousands of items, and if you don't put in a limit, that's what it's going to make a call to when you ask for those items. You go to that page, and you're going to have to wait for all those items to come down to the client. So you have to, as far as I know, if it's a designer, you have to actually rebuild the content. You probably can edit it, but you got to go change that.
What's puzzling is that he should have seen that error or the warning message in the GUI when he was creating it, because it'll tell you that it wants you to put some sort of filter in there, whether it's like a max count or something else.
Is there a way that he could have missed it, or is it like something that you prompted for?
It'll allow you to keep going. It's a strong suggestion.
Okay. All right. Thanks. That'll be helpful. And then Husan says apply the filter on a BDC content type. Husan, you need to definitely get a mic next time. You're very helpful. We appreciate it. So the next question is, I was using the get fast search metadata crawl property to retrieve a crawl property. I've noticed that the response is too slow to measure the execution time. I used the measure command cn-let. The average time it takes to retrieve a crawl property is 1.5 minutes. If I create a PowerShell script to retrieve crawl properties, let's say 10, the total time is about 15 minutes. So basically, she's asking, are there any possible reasons for this behavior? And is there a way that she can improve the retrieving time from her crawl properties in a PS script, PowerShell script?
So, Natalia, I don't know if you want to take that one, but I have some experience with this. There is, I mean, first of all, I don't have an answer why it takes so long, but it is a notoriously kind of slow API. Actually, they mentioned that the managed properties are a little quicker. Those are slow too. So I've even seen things time out, like third-party tools that do things like collect a lot of managed properties will often time out. So you'll see like the maker of these third-party products tell you to like change your web config so that the UI doesn't time out because it takes so freaking long. To answer the question at the end, there is probably a better way to retrieve multiple crawled properties at once, and there's a filter switch that you can add. So it's get fast search metadata crawled properties /filter, and then you can add like a kind of like a little query in there. So like if it contains the word author, then it'll return every crawled property in your index that contains the word author, and that would be your fastest way to get, to target multiple crawled properties at once.
All right. I didn't know if Natalia wanted to add anything. All right. Well, thanks so much. We're getting these questions answered. Excited. All right. The next one is I have one web server, one app server, and one SQL 2008 R2 server. I have installed SSRS on the app server and configured everything, I believe, in SharePoint 2010. And I cannot connect from Report Builder outside of SharePoint. But when I try, oh, he can connect to Report Builder outside of SharePoint. But when he tries to create a doc with Report Builder in SharePoint, I get a 404. Has anyone seen this issue? Sorry, Jim, no one has seen this issue.
No. First question I'd have is, did he install an integrated mode? I would assume so, because he says he's got SSRS on the app server. And I don't understand what outside of SharePoint can connect from Report Builder outside of SharePoint. If you're in integrated mode, I don't know how you can use Report Builder from outside of SharePoint.
You could download Report Builder just from the web and just run it on your workstation.
True.
But you'd have to, I guess if SharePoint wasn't configured correctly to be integrated, then that just wouldn't work. So,
yeah.
So the things, kind of the checklist of things to do to make sure SSRS is working is you install SSRS, like, you know, just on one of your SharePoint servers that has the SharePoint bits on it, and then you go through the SSRS configuration manager, or configuration manager, and then you have to kind of go through all the little screens in the configuration manager, and it's going to prompt you to create a database. It's going to prompt you to put in like a user account that has access to the database, and you have to make sure you put it in integrated mode through all those steps. And then after you do that, then you have to go to Central Admin and go to your General Application settings and go to your reporting settings in there. And there are like 3 different links in there having to do with reporting, and I usually just start with the first one and just kind of click through and make sure I can, like the one with the defaults, if you can't get to that, like if you get an error, then you know that something's not working correctly yet. So just the fact that you can get to a lot of those screens a lot of the times means that it's set up okay, but it's going to basically prompt you to activate all the features in, you know, your site collections in there. I just don't have it in front of me. I can't really tell you off the top of my head what the names of those links are, but so it's installing SSRS from your SQL installation, then going to through the SSRS configuration wizard on the server, and then going to Central Admin and properly setting up all those screens. And there's like tons of documentation online and stuff for kind of what all those steps are. But then once you do that, then you should be able to just go to a library, just any library. It could just be a document library, and you should be able to add, there are going to be 3 content types that have to do with reporting. And you should be able to add those 3 content types to your library, and then when you click the new button in the drop-down box in that library, you could pick like Report Builder Report. Or obviously, before you build a report, you usually have to create a data source, so I would do that first. But anyway, so that's how you start doing that once it's set up and integrated. Does that help?
I think it's always helpful to have a step-by-step process when you're trying to troubleshoot.
Yeah, a lot of times people get so hung up on that part just to get it to work that you don't even get to the part where you get to see how cool all the actual reports are. It's like half the calls that I get on with clients for SSRS, it's just like getting it to function. But I don't get to do as much of the fun part with the creating reports.
It is night and day better in 2012, by the way. You just set up the service application, out goes to deploy, it's just there. It's wonderful.
No, I keep meaning to do that. That'd be nice. I need to do that.
So thank you so much, guys. That was great, and I'm really excited. 3 for 3. So this is the last one, and this one was sent by Izat. He says we're trying to achieve image thumbnails results like Google in its image tab searching, and I guess his main question is fast search cannot show thumbnails for images out of the box. Well, that's his question. Can fast search show thumbnails for images out of the box?
It can for Office documents that reside within SharePoint 2010.
So only Office documents?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then there are a bunch of partners out there like BA Insight and Surfray and Discover Technologies that have bolt-on products that will generate previews, and they typically support more file types, and also remove that restriction that it's only for files that reside in SharePoint 2010.
There we go, 4 for 4. Thank you so much. I wanted to, we have about 4 minutes left, so if there's any other questions, you can raise your hand or you can submit it in the questions blog. Now, panel, I know you're going to beat me up for this, but I just thought that I've got this request a couple of times, and it's Daniel just sent in a request, thought of a good topic for next week, the key features coming in SharePoint 2013. I know that you can't speak about what you know, so I think that answers my question.
You guys can have a nice conversation.
I'm sorry, yes, I just want to let those of you who are there know that they signed an agreement where they can't really release any information about SharePoint 2013, I guess until the beta comes out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I guess so.
Released. The public beta is released.
The public beta, okay. So, sorry, Daniel. All right. So, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I don't see any other questions for today. I want to let you know that you can always submit your questions throughout the week on SharePointShopTalk.com, or you can even tweet them to us, and we'll log them in for you. And always want to give the panel any last minute. John, you just wrote a new blog. We posted it on the Facebook page. What was it again?
Which one?
Your last one.
The absolute latest one. I encountered an issue with PowerView with SQL Server 2012. So reporting services in 2012, you can use this new tool called PowerView, which is kind of end user quick reporting. I hesitate to even call it reporting, but it's an analytical tool. It kind of I look at it as the same relationship to reporting services that Power Pivot has to analysis services. But basically, it's a real quick way to get some really sharp-looking and really well-working analytical reports. However, doesn't really. There's not a lot of good documentation on how to set up the security. So there's a couple of permissions you need to add to your analysis services server. Particularly, you need to make sure that you're reporting the account that your reporting service application now that is using has admin access to your analysis services instance that your multidimensional model is sitting on. So that was the latest one. There's one other one too, but there's another little glitch, but it doesn't stop you from working.
Yep, and I added that on Facebook as well as Laura's latest blog. I just don't have it in front of me, so I can't remember. But we got a lot of likes on those, Laura and John. So thanks so much for continuously blogging. So we want to thank everybody for being on, and we hope to hear from you next week. I really appreciate everyone's time and your efforts. Thanks so much. Hassan, thanks a lot as well.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.